I haven't actually seen Life of
That's
Pi.
okay. I've read the book and seen the movie, so I can talk about that.
Oh, so you're a super
Well,
fan.
I mean,
You're a super fan of Pi.
whatever. I don't know.
It's
This
like
is
your
not
life
okay.
of
That's
Pi.
enough. So this is not just so it's clear to Mike. This is not the cold open. I was gonna start it off with, okay, Jacob, you get two more forget jokes. All right, I'm cutting you off.
Is that the cold open?
That's the cold open.
Oh, okay. See, now all of this is now officially the cold open, which is way better than your canned cold open anyway. So,
you know, see that tear rolling down
the
my
music.
eye,
Da, 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 da.
Welcome to the Voyage podcast, a show that traverses the oceans of myth and legend through the lens of Catholic theology and philosophy. Come aboard as we set sail in pursuit of the heroic life and Christian virtue, with your hosts, Mike Schramm and Jacob Platty.
All right, welcome everybody to this episode of the Voyage podcast, where we do a little bit of follow-up, but we kind of wanted to go in our own direction, kind of based off of the memory episode that we recorded sort of in honor of Dr. Kevin Vos, but then we interviewed him originally because we thought that memory played a really important role in the formation of mythology and culture and then theology, right? Which is really, according to Jacob and I mean, it's sort of a natural extension from the mythology.
Very authoritative.
Yeah, exactly.
According to two very authoritative
figures. Which basically, our whole thing is that theology is the natural development or progression of mythology. You could say they kind of work hand in hand. So if memory played such an essential role to mythology and theology, and like we both have said, the human person, we wanted to kind of keep talking about some of our favorite examples of pop culture that has to do with memory. Jacob he wanted me to try to squeeze it into the last episode, and I said we can't do a 2-hour episode just because you want to talk about Total Recall.
I know, but then Total Recall becomes an episode unto itself. So who's the real winner, right? I mean,
definitely not our listeners, that's for sure.
Hey, can I just, before we keep going forward, one of these days you're going to get me into trouble with all of this royal we stuff that you're always pulling. It is all the time where you're just roping me into whatever's coming off.
Who's going to go after you, Jacob? You Orthodox have no central authority like the Pope, so who's going to go after you? Who's going to kick you out?
Our authority comes from the Holy Spirit, Mike.
Ooh.
I've
never heard that before in the last 500 years. No Christian group.
The head of our church is Jesus. The head of our church is Jesus, Mike.
No Christian group has ever said that before. That's so original. Should have put that put that one in our Batman episodes. It was so original.
I mean, yeah, you've just got dunked, right? I mean, come on.
I think
it's all crumbling down. The house of cards just falls apart.
Catholicism will never recover from this, I think, is the meme.
Yeah. It's like, you're always saying, yeah, we think this, we think that. It's like, I mean, I guess that passes muster, but I was
looking at your face to see what kind of faces you're gonna make when I rope him into this. So
it's like theology is the natural extension of mythology. It's like, I guess.
I mean, deal with it.
Sure, why not?
Are you going to prove me wrong? Because I mean,
me and Mike have always believed that Culver's is the superior food chain to Dairy Queen.
I can live with that.
Actually, ironically, I don't even agree with that statement. So somehow I still got put words in my own mouth that I don't
yourself,
believe in.
I think is what the kids say.
I feel like this is what happens when the hostage starts to adopt the opinions of the hostage taker. It's a syndrome.
Stockholm.
It's Stockholm syndrome. That's the one. You done that.
I thought you were gonna say.
See, now I'm saying things I don't even. Now I'm gaslighting myself.
And I thought you were gonna say this is what happens when you don't make an outline, and I was gonna wholeheartedly agree with you. But so
I would never admit to that.
Jake, if you would allow me, if you would just indulge me for a second, I wanted to talk about one more example from more than 40 years ago of something that has to do with memory. Ooh. So I mentioned before, or I've talked in the past, the role of memory when it comes to, in Dante's Divine Comedy. And actually, there's one more example that we haven't talked about, which is if you go to the top of Purgatorio, so the second leg of Dante's journey, the last thing after he's been purified of all the sins.
Is at the top? Oh, so it's literally the top
Yeah,
of
so it's
Purgatorio. So not the start of Purgatorio, but the top
so after
the end of Purgatorio.
And it's before his, because again, Purgatorio isn't just about forgiveness of sins, it's really more about you let go of your attachment to sin. And so what Dante has to do before his final purification can happen, he's let go of, he goes through it's broken up into 7 levels for each of the 7 deadly sins, or 7 capital sins. But before he can have that final purification, he has to be bathed in the river Lethe, which Dante actually has. If you go back to the beginning of Canto 1 of Purgatorio, he does have a sort of baptism. He has to go into this water and have his face is washed from the soot and the ash of hell, because he was just in Inferno. So he has a sort of like pseudo baptism at the beginning, but then he has this final purification at the top. And the river Lethe, why that's significant here, is because it's the river of forgetting. It's the river of forgetfulness. And so now it's not just that Dante has to be purified of the sin. He has to forget, even like, in a sense, you can almost say forget that the sins ever happened. Like he's so detached from the sin that it's like they never happened. And Catholics will oftentimes use a similar analogy of forgetfulness when they talk about when people go to confession, that not only does the priest who heard the confession like completely forget what sins you had just said to him, but that you'll even have saints who will have visions of, like, even in a sense, Jesus, the omniscient God, will forget, in this kind of metaphorical sense, forget that your sins happened. Like you'll be so detached from those sins. And so Dante has to go through something similar, like I said, at the top of Purgatorio, which I think is significant because, again, it's after he's been purified of the sins, and then there's this forgetfulness. And so, again, obviously we've been talking about memory. This is sort of the opposite of that. But again, Purgatorio is getting rid of the bad stuff. So.
Well, it plays really, really well with a large part of the conversation that we had last time, because we were talking about Captain Kirk saying, like, I need my pain, right? Or whatever. I hate to bring things in that like timestamp when we're doing this recording, because I know we do typically record early and then these get played at a later date, and sometimes those dates get shifted around, and so it's better to try to keep these episodes independent of kind of like what's happening in the immediate moment, unless we're intentionally making an episode for that. We do that too. This isn't one of them though, but I'm going to do it anyway just because of how timely it is. So a while back, that new Flash trailer dropped. This is being recorded before the movie has come out, so I haven't seen the movie. But in the Flash trailer, the second one, there's a lot of for someone who grew up watching the Michael Keaton Batman films, I'm super psyched about it. For someone who's a huge fan of the Flashpoint Paradox storyline, super excited about it. And for someone who is an apologist for the Snyderverse trilogy, as long as you watch Man of Steel, the extended cut of Batman v Superman, stupid movie title, and Zack Snyder's Justice League, if you watch those specific films, there's a defense. And this movie, having not seen it, I don't know, it looks like it's really riffing off of elements from the Zack Snyder cut, right, of the Justice League, which is not what happened in theaters. So depending upon what they do, either it's going to be a direct continuation of the Zack Snyder cut, which I doubt, because that wouldn't make any sense. But it just sure does look like it, because a big difference between the Snyder cut and the one that aired in theaters was there's a time travel plot element in the Snyder cut. And obviously this new movie is going to be about Barry Allen, the Flash, trying to use time travel to go save his mom. So they introduced that concept that he's capable of doing that in the Snyder cut Justice League movie. I don't know how they'll explain it for audiences. Most people didn't watch the Snyder cut, so I don't know. They'll have some explanation. But anyway, all of this trailer that we have all seen by this point is a lot about Michael Keaton's Batman talking about how important his pain was. Or actually, it's Ben Affleck's Batman who has the lines like, the memory of my parents' death is what formed me, is what does, we
Yeah,
need
there
that
wouldn't be
pain to
Batman
make us who
without
we are.
it.
They have like a significant amount of the trailer dialogue is devoted to this concept of needing our pain and needing the memories of it to help shape us and drive us. We talked a lot about this the last time, and this is an interesting almost counterpoint, though I suppose there's probably a fairly easy way to reconcile the two perspectives. But it does raise an interesting argument in my mind. Is the best way to think about this as holding on to, because I'll go ahead and I'll use like C.S. Lewis when he's talking about this. I'm pretty sure it's the problem of pain in his book. He is talking about how Jesus's wounds are probably always going to be there, right? And in some sense, it's possible that heaven for Saint Peter is the constant knowledge of his denial of
Mhm.
Christ and the constant joy of the forgiveness that Christ gives him, right? In other words, if you lose memory of your sins, and if Jesus forgets you ever did them to begin with, right? Is that actually a better way? Does that mean more to us than, no, Jesus remembers your sins. He just loves you
Mhm.
anyway, right? Which is more profound? That's not we don't have to like have an answer to that debate. And I do think that Dante was being, it's a question. Was he being, how metaphorical was
Mhm.
Dante being? Or how metaphorical is the church, the Catholic Church, being when it talks about Jesus forgetting our sins like this? I mean, what are your thoughts on
Well,
that?
so yeah, I guess to that point too, and I realized it was maybe not the most precise language or way that I was speaking about it when I originally did. Uh, it also reminded me as you were kind of describing the concept of what and not just Catholics, but historic Christians believe about the final judgment or the general judgment at the end of time. And I always talk with my students about saying, well, this seems really weird. It's like, did God not have enough information the first time when you died and he decided if you were going to heaven or hell? Or why do we need this second judgment? And it's not just about, oh, God had some more time to think about it and changed his mind. He said you were going to hell, but now he decided you're going to heaven, that sort of thing. It's more, now
Mm,
you can see, because this is the end of history, the end of time, all of the effects of those actions, good or bad. And so you can, and not just bad like, oh, it's going to make me feel bad about it even though I'm in heaven now. It's more, how was God able to bring good even out of the evil actions that happened, whether they were to me or because of what I did. And so in a sense, yeah, there's still a
mhm,
memory component going on. And this is why I said it doesn't mean that God stops being omniscient or Jesus stops being omniscient just because you went to
mhm,
confession. So that's like why I said it was maybe the not the most precise language to use. It's really, like I said, it's that metaphorical way to describe how distant we become from our sins, right? And
mhm.
and like I said, I can't remember exactly where I've heard, but it's like as far as the east is from the west, which again, that's obviously very
Yeah.
metaphorical because we live in a
I
globe.
read that in a book
Yeah.
somewhere. It was in a book
Uh,
somewhere, probably Plato.
yeah. Okay. Don't.
Um,
Yeah.
but,
Forget about that joke, please. So, um, but there again is obviously that's
forget.
very metaphorical because we live in a globe. So it's the east is gonna hit the west eventually,
Yeah.
right? Or unless the concept of eastness and westness is so infinitely apart from each other, and that's maybe the deeper thing that Dante's trying to get to, and so there again is like you could say the pain from your sin or how your sin has formed you. Yeah, like you still are who you are because of your memories, right? That forms your identity. But that's maybe the bigger, more important thing to kind of take away. And yeah, of course, God doesn't stop being
Mhm.
omniscient just because you went to confession. So, but you
Sure,
wanted to
sure.
talk about Total Recall, I thought.
Um, I do, yeah. No, let's get to it. So yeah, Total Recall, and I this should be a pretty, we are off the grid here. We are off map. We're just talking. So thanks for that, Mike. We get to just do it, play
I
this
was gonna
Jacob's
say, I
way.
hope that was sincere
Um,
because this is what you beg for every time we record. So
beg for. I don't know if I'm begging. I'm just doing. But so anyway, Total Recall is a great contribution to this concept of memory and how it plays with us and how it informs us and things like that. And even how it ultimately impacts culture. Because when y- have you seen? either there's 2 Total
I've
Recall
seen the
movies
Schwarzenegger
now.
one. I have not seen the Colin Farrell one. I
Yeah.
remember like being somewhat interested,
Good.
but never really pursuing it too hard.
I mean, in fairness, the Colin Farrell one is not a bad movie, right? I mean, people like myself want to poo-poo it because it's not the original and things like that. And it's probably technically, I think I heard that it's more accurate to the, I think the Philip K. Dick
That wouldn't
short
surprise
story
me. I mean,
that it's
he's
all
got some
based
really
off.
good, like he's
Yeah.
Minority Report.
Mhm.
He is, I think he's
Mhm.
also Man in the High Castle, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I
Anyway,
believe he
sorry, keep
is, yeah.
going.
Um, I th I might be mixing it up with Minority Report, but I do think Total Recall might be part of this too. I know Blade Runner,
Oh yeah.
that's definitely Philip
No,
K. Dick.
I'm almost certain
Mhm.
Minority Report is,
Um,
but sorry, go ahead.
yeah, I think it is too. So anyway, in Total Recall, the premise for Total Recall is that you have a construction worker, you know, played by Arnold Schwarzenegger, which, hey, at least it's fitting, right? At least it's not Arnold Schwarzenegger
Playing a
like
kindergarten
being,
teacher,
you know, a cubicle, yeah, a kindergarten teacher, or pretending to
undercover, I should
be
say.
an insurance salesman. Yeah, or yeah, he's always in these like normal roles,
Or
but they're
the a
undercover
toy.
roles, so that's
Is
why
he
you
like a
have a
toy
super
salesman or
jacked.
something? What is he in Jingle All the Way? I don't know. That one's an old reference too now, but
Yeah, you know, it's like okay, but so then again, Dr. Voss, he was a heavyweight lifter guy, and you know, he was a mild mannered
well, he
psychologist
hadn't taken
type.
his
So
glasses off, right? That's like Superman, like
he
so
hadn't.
that's the
Yeah, that's the
thing.
thing,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. But at least in Total Recall, they give him a more reasonable job description as a like rock breaking construction worker guy, right? But he's got this weird desire to go to Mars. He just can't get Mars out of his head. And he's got a beautiful wife at home, and she's like always saying, "No, we don't need to go anywhere. That's crazy." Meanwhile, there's this technology called Total Recall, which allows you to go and have the memories of going on vacation implanted into your mind, right? So you will believe, you will feel, it will be like you
Hmm.
did it, but it's like a tenth of the price, right? Because you don't have to, and you can actually have some level of control over like what happens on your vacation. You know, there's lots of like kind of like seedy implications
Yeah.
for what people might choose to do with that type of a technology. But one of the fun implications of it is they suggest so he goes behind his wife's back, right? And his best friend. His best friend's like, "Nah, that messes your brain up, dude. Don't do it." So everyone's saying, "No, don't do it, don't do it." But the drive compels him
The
anyway.
forbidden
He
fruit.
goes, yeah, you know, and he just can't. He keeps having like nightmares about Mars. It's just this weird stuff. When he gets the Total Recall, the director of Total Recall is like, "Hey, you want to have some real fun? We can make you have the memory of being a spy, and so you can live out the experience of being this super secret agent spy guy, and it'll be like you actually lived it." Which, frankly, doesn't that make it feel like it would break the whole premise? Because if you go back into I mean, do you come out of that thinking you're still a spy and that you just, like, achieved maybe the end of the
Is it
vacation when
it's
you're a
too much of a
spy
come
is you
down to know that it
retiring
was all
from the
fake or something? I don't know.
No, it's just like, I know I'm not a spy before I go on vacation, but then I go on vacation and suddenly I'm a spy, and then when I get off of vacation, I'm no longer a spy? Like, how does that work? I'm just asking the questions. I suspect that they implant a retirement ceremony at the end of your vacation so that you are no longer a spy, and then you just go back to
It's
your
a
regular
yeah,
life.
they gotta
Um,
fill it like
they
they've
retcon
gotta
your
like tie
life.
up the loose ends or
Um
something.
but then does that mean that they overwrite, like, your perspective and this is gonna get into our larger conversation, which is, there's a reason for some of this jokiness. Does that mean they overwrite the memories of your life
Well,
before your vacation so that you
it's
were a
just like
spy
Eternal
before
Sunshine, right?
vacation
Where
too?
it's like it's
It
too
will be,
many.
or it'll be like I wanna talk about Big Fish today, I wanna talk about some other, this I think what's gonna come up here is, in this conversation, a lot of it's gonna be about how memory works for us as individuals and how we participate in it, and how it applies to our lives as religious individuals and things like that. Um, like, so alright, I'll just you know, like, Big Fish, for example, is a movie about a father and his son, and the son is estranged from his father because he's super tired of all of the outlandish stories that his father is always telling. and he knows they're made up. He knows that they're not real, but everyone loves his father
Yeah.
anyway because he's just like a good dude.
I I
Did you
love
see Big
that. I've seen
Fish?
that movie
Tim
so many
Tim
times. I
Burton?
love that movie. My wife and I both love that
Oh,
movie.
okay, cool.
And I love the sort of like
Yeah, it's a
the implications of it, or the kind of, I guess you'd say, the moral or the theme at the end of like, what is, when we refer to something as the truth. And this is something that you and I have conversations about all the time, which is, don't be so reductive about what you mean by calling something the truth, you know? And that's really
sure.
what I mean. One of the biggest things in Big Fish is when you say, is this true or not true? And you're like, well, your definition of truth needs to be a lot bigger, you know?
And we got to be careful because it is annoying to me that this is a dangerous, I think this is an important conversation, but I also think it's kind of a dangerous conversation because it is way too easy to simplify some of the statements we're probably going to make or some of the statements you just made just now into saying, well, truth is relative.
Oh no.
My truth and your truth and everyone's truth, right? Like, that's not what I'm trying to communicate. But I admit that it would be easy for people to run with some of this conversation and turn it into a truth is relative type, you know, reduction, which is hopefully we don't get there. Like, we
Well,
don't
and that's at
convey
least,
that
if
with this
nothing else, that's
conversation.
not the intention, which that doesn't like necessarily get us off scot-free or whatever, because we're being too, I don't
Mhm.
feel like it's too flippant, or, I even kind of said before, maybe the language was too imprecise, which that's really, I mean, all mystical theology is imprecise language. And then it takes the kind of more
Mhm.
systematic theologians to either parse something out or to make distinctions or to clarify. I mean, and so that's why, when it comes to the life of the church, it's always about both and. It's not about just one side of the equation or the other, right? You need the mystics as much as you need the
Wasn't there
systematics.
who was the scholastic that wrote the yes and no treatise? Uh I think it was the Occam. Like, I forget his, like,
Oh, William of
Occam's
Ockham?
razor. Um Yeah, there you go, William of Ockham. He wrote, I think his main claim to fame. Nowadays he's remembered for his razor, but um, he wrote a book called Yes and No, and it's literally that. It's like, is this true? Well, yes
Well,
and no.
I mean, he's
What about
definitely
that? Well,
considered
yes and
by,
no.
like,
Like,
he's
that's his
considered almost
whole.
like the father of nominalism, the father of what became relativism. And I know relativism long
Hmm.
predated William of Ockham, but the relativism that, like, whether it's moral relativism that we kind of experience, no, William of Ockham is very much yeah, it's not surprising that, yeah, you'd have this, like, almost a,
Well, and we should be careful not to ascribe. We don't want to ascribe. Like, I sincerely doubt that he considered himself a relativist, right? Though he may have been the progenitor, the unintentional progenitor of much more profound uses of nominalism and relativism that were probably against what he would
no,
have
it's the
personally believed.
nominalism that sort of gave birth to some of these more later modern, like, philosophical movements, which, again, yeah, even though people will complain about relativism today as if it's a new thing, I mean, it predates Christianity, to be honest. Relativism was around, before that.
Sure.
So no, it's more the nominalism of, when you were saying, well, yes and no, of like, it's one thing to make distinctions and say, well, in this sense yes, but in this sense no. But when it's yes, the two contraries in the same sense, well, that's where you get a contradiction, right? That's where it doesn't work anymore.
Hmm.
But
Well, and we have an Eastern Father, Maximus Confessor, who wrote the Ambiguities, and that's a book that's attempting to reconcile yes and no statements in the church
mhm.
fathers, right? But anyway, all of it to say that what you were saying was theology throughout history is a corrective measure, right? It's always statements that are made uh, are never like, there's this misconception that what church fathers did throughout history was come up with ideas and then say, hey, I just got this great new idea, this makes sense, doesn't it? And then everyone else like agreeing with them, and then like, okay, well, now we believe that. Okay, well, now we believe this, right? And it like develops in that way. Whereas theology is way better understood as refining what the entire truth was as we received it, but over time, we learn better ways of
Mhm.
describing it, but we're never contradicting what came before. We're just refining, usually, almost always, in contradiction to a bad interpretation. So, a heretic will be like, "What this means is this," and he's not making up something new. He's taking what he received, but he's interpreting it in a
Yeah.
negative way,
Well,
or in
or
a way that's incorrect, or
one of the
not
best
whole.
descriptions of heresy in
Um,
general is that it's upholding one true aspect of the faith at the expense of all the others. So yeah, like they'll talk
right.
about, we look back at those first 7 ecumenical councils, which were basically all called to address some sort of heresy. And the thing about all of those heretics, whether it's Arius or Nestorius or whoever, is it wasn't that they were saying something 100% wrong. It's that the thing they were saying that was right was being done at the expense of the rest of the faith.
Yeah, it was out of
Yeah.
balance. It was out of balance. And so, uh, you know, I don't know, how do we get here? We were just talking about theology, I
Well,
suppose, but
yeah. So you were
uh,
talking about memory, total recall,
we can
going
go
back,
back.
and like
Yeah, going back to Total Recall and Big
yeah.
Fish and all
So
that, and then
so
that got
well,
into
that's
like
the thing. You
relativism
were
and
kind of
stuff. But
describing Big Fish, and one of the big themes is, when the dad tells these quote unquote true stories, the kid, the son, has a too reductionistic definition of truth, where it's, did it, like literally happen, or did it historically, in the way that I define history, happen? And we were both saying is that there's a deeper truth to those stories, which is sort of revealed in the funeral scene, right?
well, yeah, well, so I guess just to, because like, okay, yeah, we'll just keep going with Big Fish for now. Absolutely. At the end of Big Fish, you find out that there was like basically everything his father said was half true. Whereas his son just assumed that the tales were so outlandish and so beyond, like he meets a giant, right? And it's like, well, giants aren't real, so there's no way my dad met a giant, right? But then it turns out a giant shows up at his funeral,
Mhm.
right? And he's a man with that condition, that like growth condition that causes people to outsize their, the growth pattern of
Mhm.
most humans, right? But he's still like, whatever, 9, 10 feet tall. He's huge. Um, and so what this does, this came up, Big Fish came up because I was joking about how in Total Recall, the only way for this enterprise to work is like, hey, we'll make you a spy on vacation. Is either like they basically imply that they have to retcon your entire life in order for you to like buy into the idea that you're actually a spy on vacation. And as that movie continues, what makes that such a fun concept, right? You can take or leave the execution because it is kind of a cheesy B movie, but it's a fantastic cheesy B movie, and I love it. Not necessarily for the kids,
Yeah.
Total Recall. Parental advisory. It's definitely an R-rated film. But you know what? By today's standards, it's pretty mild still, I would say. Uh,
You're such a
anyway,
relativist.
that movie gets. I am. What can I say? My opinion developed over
It
time.
evolved. It
But
evolved over time is what you're saying. Sorry,
I'm
I
just
keep getting you off
addressing
track.
I'm just addressing the opinions that I had that needed to be corrected. But so he goes ahead and he says, "Oh yeah, I want to be a super spy." But then in the context of the movie, as soon as he goes under, as soon as they sedate him, the movie's like, something's wrong. He's already got memories of Mars in here. There's something going on here. What's happening? Blah, blah, blah. And then he has to get emergency taken out of the machine because it's messing with his head. And the rest of the movie from that point on is one big question. Is he in total recall, experiencing an actual, or like experiencing the vacation where he's just a spy? And is everything that's happening right now actually happening, or is it just
And
the
if he
fake vacation
if he
that he
dies in
signed up
Total
for?
Recall, does he die in real life? Right?
It's right, right. And well, that even comes up in the
Oh,
movie
I know.
because like
I've seen it.
there's yeah, you know, there's this moment where like, because everyone keeps trying to convince him, dude, you're just on vacation. Like this is fake. Like quit killing everybody, or you're gonna mess things up. You're gonna mess yourself up. You gotta, they're quote unquote talking him off the ledge, saying, just come with us. We will get you out of the machine. This is all just gone Harry. And his name's Harry in the movie.
Oh.
But this has all gone wrong. But he's like, well, if this doesn't matter, then none of this matters. That's kind of his retort kind of thing. What are you worried about? I'm not going to die.
It's all a simulation.
But
you know?
And then he kills the guy that was trying to convince him that death doesn't matter or that's all fake. He's like, oh, you got a bead of sweat rolling down your head, so you don't believe what you believe, and so then he kills him. But it's a fun concept because as a viewer for a long time, you're just not is like, well, you're kind of led to believe that it's real, but there's always that everyone keeps telling him it's not real, right? And so he has to kind of like make his decision is, do I basically lay into this as reality, or do I believe people that tell me it's just a dream kind of thing? I'd say by the end of the movie, you get a little bit more firm of an answer as to whether it's real or not. But frankly, I think that people still do debate it. I think that because it can all be, you could read the entire rest of that film as all just in his head, right? Up to credits and just roll with that, But it still implies that his memories have been forever altered, right? In the context of that film, his memories had been previously altered, and now he's regaining memories because he's in this, circumstance that's giving him his memories back and things like that. What this means for us as people, and what's true about it from a psychological perspective, is that when we remember things, we are recreating those memories in our minds. And we have the opportunity to engage with our traumas in a way that we can shape how that trauma shapes us. Like we are not beholden, we are not tied to our shame or our guilt. Or the traumas that affect us. I mean, I know that's easier said than done. I'm not dismissing the hard work of therapy and overcoming trauma and things like that. But a key tenet of being able to overcome that trauma from a therapeutic perspective is understanding that we can participate in our memories. We can bring to the table new knowledge of where those memories took us, right? And we don't need to stay stuck at the moment of trauma, and just be captive to that trauma. We can take the information that we have post trauma and rewrite the story in our mind, fill in the gaps, give it more context, give it a greater appreciation for what it provided us, right? Not just the negatives, but the positives, and then basically redeem the past within us as large of a part of a bigger story that Christ is writing in our lives.
And actually, this wasn't even the intention of like the theme of this episode or whatever. But like you said, the sort of redemption that happens by getting the wider context, that's one of the biggest benefits. And I know your background or your bachelor's is in history, and so that's one of those really important things. And people will sometimes debate about what history is being taught or how history is being taught, and we're not going to get into all that right now. But in the same way that a person can go through memories of their own life and their own identity and see them as a 20 or as a 30 or as a 50-year-old with hopefully more context and more, tools to either make sense of things than if it happened to them when they were 5 years old, 10 years old, 20 years old, whatever. That's where the healing can happen, right? And so you can do the same thing for not just the identity of one individual person or the healing of one individual person, but the healing of a culture, healing of a church or a community or a country or whatever the case is. And so that's the role that like I said, the looking back on history, that's one of the values of it, or that it can provide too.
One of the things, not to get all culture warrior here, but one of the issues that's at play, that's at stake in our modern conversation about like America's past, right? Is how much do we want to hold on to the trauma of the past? I don't want to be belligerent. I don't want to be dismissive, right? And we're not going to come up with some kind of final answer for that in this podcast. But there is a path forward where we remember our history, but we also redeem our history by taking into account the larger context and the broader context. If you only live in like the shame in the past, that can become destructive, right? Because nations and cultures, they operate the exact same way a human individual does. And if you want to look at, the kind of, here in 2023, a lot of people are of the opinion that America is not in a good place culturally, right? That there's a kind of bipolar thing happening where we got nations within nations and divisions are real, and there's this culture war thing is really ramping up. And I 100%, not a metaphor, 100% look at us as a mentally ill culture. That culture, in my mind, is just a word for spirit, and the spirit of America is diseased, right? You break down the word disease, and it just means like uneasy, right? Like you're not at ease, you're not relaxed. The spirit of America has lost its identity. It doesn't have a common story it tells itself. It doesn't have a common mythology it tells itself anymore. It's literally a split personality type situation, right? Like a nation divided against itself cannot stand, right? A house divided against itself cannot stand.
Yeah.
You can't build. Yeah, all these Plato quotes I'm throwing out. Like the sand. If your house is built
the
on
Plato
sand,
estate
right,
is going to be so mad at us for co-opting all of this. Plato's not getting any of these royalties.
I can't believe it. But like that house of like the sand foundation, as opposed to like a solid rock foundation, that is the mythology. That foundation is our cultural memory, and not just our memory, but our story, right? So to bring this back to the big fish thing, what that father's son demands of his father is just the facts, just the memories, right? And those memories better be journalistic. Those memories better be, scientifically quantifiable, right? And what his father refuses to do is relegate his life to just a bunch of trivia.
Yeah.
Just a bunch of details that don't have the meaning that he gives them. So when he talks about going to, this town off the beaten path, and this town is this magical place, and he has to go through like these creepy woods, and all these kind of like mythic qualities to the story he's telling.
His wife, who becomes the mother, and time literally stops, but then it has to speed up again to catch up, and it's like, okay, Dad, roll your eyes.
Yeah, and then all of a sudden,
you're not getting it. You're not getting it.
But you know what? What's the better story, right? Not that it's an excuse, because I don't think he's lying either. I think what he's doing is he's talking about how time stops. We all know what he means by that when he meets his wife. And then he's talking about the whirlwinds of the first few years of their lives together, right? And then all of a sudden you have babies, and all of a sudden you have jobs, and all of a sudden where did all the time go? And it's sped up, right? He is making a story out of the truth of what happens, but he is using, because stories are captured in language, right? And because language gives us pictures, there is a transmutation that occurs between the trivial truth. It gets transmuted, alchemical, if you will, into the myth of your life. And they don't contradict each other. They're just, one is a fuller, richer, more personal experience, whereas the other is this weird kind of like datum.
The story is greater than the sum of its parts, I think, is kind of, because it's like, it's more than just, like you said, the trivial things, the trivia that happens over the course of, January 1st to January 2nd to January 3rd, right? It's more than that. And like you said, whether you want to describe it in this metaphorical way of time stopping and then speeding up again, or whatever, there again, it's like there's that freedom of how to describe it or how to allegorize it, whether you're making sense of a painful thing or you're making sense of just all of life in general. And I think that's this whole thing is all kind of being tied into memory, right? Going back to Total Recall, going back to Big Fish, and how he's remembering these stories because the dad is at the end of his life, and so the son and his wife are sort of like taking care of him in these final days and stuff. It actually, and I know we were kind of joking about this before, but it's very similar to kind of how the story in Life of Pi is told. So now it's more the traumatic event of this young boy experiences he and his family are on a shipwreck, and he has to survive for, I don't remember exactly how long. I think it's a long time
with a tiger in a boat.
Well, really, yeah.
I seen the movie poster.
So so what happens is he has to make sense of this very traumatic thing. And I guess spoiler alert or whatever. It's more than just a tiger. But here, I didn't say it's not a tiger. I said it's more than just a tiger. And but the thing is that he's recounting this story to after he's rescued, and this is the way that he's telling it. And the people are like, wait, how did you survive on a tiger? How did you survive? There's actually a zebra. There's an orangutan. There's other animals. I think there's a jackal too, if I'm remembering. But how did you survive with all these, fearsome animals that could have all killed you? And we find out that there's more to.
It's like, I followed the law of the jungle.
Something like that.
Baloo taught me how to communicate with the animals. And
so it's more the story that he's telling. There are things that somebody would look at and be like, well, that didn't literally happen. That didn't actually happen. It's not really true. And yet there really is a deeper truth to the story that the main character, Pi, is telling. And so again, it kind of goes back to the Big Fish example, right? That's kind of like what the dad was saying with his life story. Now, his is much more charming, whereas this one is much more dramatic and tragic in many ways too. But no, it's a really powerful, so it's an allegory within an allegory, because the author, Jan Martel, is trying to kind of explain to us, because he's very interested in religious questions and mythological questions, and those things aren't necessarily contradictory of each other. But
well, one's the obvious continuation of the other, Mike. I mean, we both agree on that.
Yeah,
right?
Is that going to get me into trouble? Don't tell my bishop that, right? No, I mean, I think there's the connections between them. There are more connections between them than things that divide them. Is that a more precise or a more
sure? No, honestly,
is that a more digestible statement for
I was
you, Jacob?
giving you. I'm not even sure. I don't even know what to make of the statement, to be honest. I'd have to think about it. It sounded profound, but like most things Mike says, it's really just like, gibberish.
Well, see, I got this fortune cookie next to me, and I keep opening them, and I'm just trying to like piece together what's the best thing that I could, what's the most.
I have one of those gypsies in a glass case where like you put the quarter in, and they give me the words
Zoltar
to say.
Told me that.
We've officially revealed the entire shtick. What what drives these episodes. But Mike's outlines are just a bunch of fortune cookie papers.
That's why
he just takes a handful of them, like 20 of them, and just kind of puts them,
like straighten them out.
Like the magnets on a refrigerator, you like make the sentences up, with the letters and the words. You just do it with fortune cookies, and that's how we get our outlines. See, it makes sense now, doesn't it, guys?
Feel bad.
All right, I'm here to add a little flavor. But
bitter herbs.
Yeah, I
bitter
derailed
herbs
myself
is the
that
flavor.
time. Bitter.
So, no, it's so again, I kind of brought in Life of Pi because, like I said, he's having these memories, right? And how he's sharing how did he survive this thing. And I should also, like, the reason why he's retelling the story is because it's like the owner of the ship that he was on, or I think it's like for insurance purposes, he has to like say how did this all happen. And so there again, you have this dichotomy between just give me the facts to, well, I'm telling you the deeper truth behind these stories. And so there again, that's one of the big themes of the book and yeah, in the movie as well. I mean, some people had complaints about the movie, and the book is always better, so that's what I'm just going to stick with. But the book does a really good job of, like I said, expressing a lot of these themes. And it's one of those where it's like, yeah, the author wasn't, as far as I know, he doesn't come out and say like he's a practicing Catholic, practicing, Christian or anything like that. But he's very sensitive to just the spirit of religion in general, and he's respectful of it. And so he's not very dismissive of like, oh yeah, it's a bunch of, pie in the sky, like fairy stories, or just dismiss it as if it's just bad for the world or something like that. It's very much grasping at the truth of religion, even though it's not necessarily with the clarity of revelation that, Orthodox and Catholic Christians would say is present in the church or present in theology or whatever. So.
Well, and so like I do think that there is a tension between, and it's like just like we were talking about when we were talking about like heresy and things like that. The problem with heresy is that it's always favoring one element over all the other elements, right? Or maybe if you are able to reduce it to a yes or no question, it's leaning too far towards one affirmation as opposed to the counterfactual, let's say. Because frankly, a lot of Christian theology, especially Christology and things like that, is these two kind of, to use that language, counterfactual. It might be inappropriate to use that language, but like, how do you reconcile his manhood with his divinity and things like that? And famously, the Fourth Council is just like, he's just both. And we're just not. The problem, basically, all the things that they dismissed as heresy at that council was the concrete answers people were trying to give to how to understand that. And the council's decision was there is no concrete answer to give to this outside of 100% man, 100%
That's actually
God.
the similar to the debate between the Jesuits and the Dominicans about predestination and free will, where the Pope was like, hey, you guys got to debate this, figure this out. And they couldn't come to a conclusion. So he just said, well, this one isn't perfect, this one isn't perfect, but neither of them are inherently heretical. So you are free to kind of exist within this fence or exist within this sort of spectrum too. So it's very similar to that.
Honestly, the older I get and the more into the woo-woo mysticism of Eastern theology that I've been brought into, I've actually become quite content, quite at ease with this agnosticism about these things. That is, you hold both. Like you just hold both in both hands. And if you cannot reconcile them logically, it's okay. Now, that is anathema to the modern mindset. That is not science, right? That is not what we are driven to define as truth, what we are driven to define as necessary for things to function. And now, obviously, like if you want the electricity to stay on, you need to be operating in a mode where like there is either a yes or no answer to these problems, right? But most of human existence is not just about keeping the electricity on. And, on all of these questions, I think we are better off affirming opinions where they may not be easily reconcilable logically. Now, I mean, maybe I'm getting a little bit too much Eastern Orthodoxy in your Catholic podcast here, right? Because I do think that the Catholic Church does tend to favor a more coherent understanding of things,
I mean,
right?
I feel like you just owned yourself again by
but-
saying, "Oh, who cares about coherence?" And it's like, I think God does, but
coherence, that's a relative term, Mike.
just keep talking. That's fine. Just keep going.
Just keep
Here,
hanging myself.
I'll give you more and more rope.
This is apophaticism. This is ultimately understanding that the truths of God are profoundly beyond us. Sometimes the truths we're given by God are really, really hard to explain in light of other truths given by God. Doesn't mean that they're not both true. It just means that
you wanted to give me a hard time about fortune cookie theology, and you're like, sometimes it's just tough. Oh wow!
You know what? Here, let me reel myself back a little bit. The reason why I think this is not the same thing as what I see happening a lot in like our modern secular culture where it's like your truth is your truth and my truth is my truth and all that type of stuff, that type of like relativism, is that one of these I'm going to define my position as something like to call pre-modern, where it's more of like classical human thought or even medieval human thought, right? That's the position I'm trying to get to. And again, I
If
mean,
only you had
they
had some
were
defined
not
terms and some like logical steps to get you to that medieval place. Gosh, if only there was some sort of structure or scaffolding that would get you there. But what do I know anyway?
I am not going to try to say that I did a great job right now, but I do think that what I am contrasting here is the kind of like trivial journalistic scientific approach to knowledge. I am not saying that you ignore syllogism, that you ignore logic, that you ignore the facts on the ground, right? Um, Postmodernism, it's like what people bring to the table matters more than what the facts are. Is kind of like in a nutshell what postmodernism kind of like distills down to. And so that's where you end up with this idea, well, my truth is my truth and your truth is your truth. And there's no such thing as like a ground of truth and things like that. A pre-modern mindset would totally reject that. It's not that pre-moderns rejected the idea that there is a universal truth that we're all supposed to like fit into, that is true for everybody, right? They just recognize the limits of their own kind of like the limits of what we would call like a scientific approach, which is like all that matters is like the trivia, right?
So when we talk about the Gospels and say the Gospels are not only historically true, but they are mystically true, right? Or they are allegorically true. It's not that they're contradicting. It's that one is beyond the other and that one serves the other.
I actually like that you brought up the Gospels, because this is kind of a rubber meets the road example here. In Protestant circles, there's an effort to reconcile the gospel stories together, right? But I do honestly think that what that is the product, that idea of trying to like reconcile the discrepancies or create a cohesive narrative in the gospels, is a kind of journalistic mindset. It's a post-enlightenment mindset. It's a modernist mindset. Whereas the pre-modern mindset is different. Basically, it actually just becomes missing the point to try to treat the gospels like if there's discrepancies. If like Matthew gives a chronology for when Jesus performs these miracles along these lines, and Luke gives a chronology that's like different from that kind of thing. The only thing I want to say is that like the stories are the point of the gospels, not necessarily the trivia of when. In other words, it's just kind of like a moot question.
Missing the
I know that
forest for
some
the
people think it's
trees
very
is kind of the
it's very important to like, there's this assumption that it's really, really important for everything to fit into place.
Yeah.
But that is really not the vital element of the gospels.
And
right? Like
we've both been partially facetiously, but partially seriously pontificating on the placement of theology or the relationship of theology to these things. And it very much, obviously, sacred theology has an essential relationship to the stories, not just whether they happened or not, but even the particular details. Like so many of the church fathers, so many spiritual writers, theologians have recognized theological truths from the specific details, but they go beyond the historicity of it. And that's kind of the main point too. Which
is never a denial of the history of it.
No,
none of this is about denying.
It goes back to what I said before. History is
yeah.
not in contradiction to the mystical. It's that it serves that they both serve each other.
The reason why we have 4 different gospels is because each of those gospels serves a different cultural purpose for the audience that was listening to it, and they are all telling the story of Jesus, a historical story with historical facts. But they are not bending over backwards to they are shaping that narrative into something that is meaningful to the persons that will be hearing that narrative. Again, not at the expense of the truth, but just because it's possible to retell a story and emphasize elements, or put things in an order that makes sense to the theme of the story.
And I want to highlight the thing that you said about how it becomes meaningful either to the hearer or to the person telling it, because that goes back into our examples of Big Fish and Life of Pi, where it was meaningful in the formation of the son, right? The father to the son. And really, as we see in the movie Life, Big Fish, it's very powerful to the spouse of the son, right? She becomes a really important, almost like transmitter, because the son has become he's almost become so jaded, allergic to it, that she actually takes on that important role. And then Life of Pi, it has that healing element for the boy who did experience, who lived through and survived the shipwreck. And so the storytelling power there is it's healing or it's formative, and it doesn't just work on the individual level. This is supposed to be on the cultural or societal level. The story has this either healing element, and we kind of talked about this when it came to the role of history, but it also has a formative element. We've joked about in the past about the George Washington and the cherry tree story, and how it's deeper than true, right? Or it's deeper than historically true, because it tells us something about the identity of, who we want to be considered or seen as a nation. And so that's where, again, that's why the mythology feeds into the theology and vice versa, right? They go back and forth. And
so like it matters more that we have a story about George Washington chopping down the cherry tree than it does that he probably didn't actually do that. And you know what? That doesn't mean that we ignore one or the other. In other words, like, it's okay for me to acknowledge that George Washington probably never chopped a cherry tree down. And it's also totally okay for me to tell a story about George Washington chopping down a cherry tree.
And this actually goes back,
it's just okay to have both,
into one of our first conversations about the Gospels and the hero's journey, is that saying that the Gospels have mythological elements is not a denial of the historical elements. It's a both and. And that's where, again, not that I keep trying to defend myself about the, mythology and theology going hand in hand, but that's another perfect example where it's like we as, again, Orthodox or Catholic Christians, our theologies are, of course, based off of the Gospels, right? We know Jesus, not just from all the Old Testament allegories and the stuff that is fulfilled, but in the Gospels themselves. And so the fact that they have those mythological elements, and in a sense, they have to be there. That's the human element of the Gospels.
They serve a mythological function for us.
Yeah.
They serve as a creative, redemptive story for us as a people.
But it becomes the basis for our theology. And that's...
Right. Yeah. And it's because he actually did show up. He actually did incarnate. He actually did die under Pontius Pilate. He actually did raise again, just to go through the creed,
So if you want to just,
he rose again on the third day.
You can go ahead and I'll give you the opportunity right now. You can just admit that I was right from the beginning, even though you wanted to give me such a hard time with it, and say, oh, I don't know if I can't go along with you, Mike. Like, oh, your wild Catholic notions about, it's like, no, it all kind of gets parsed out by the end, right? We're kind of coming up to
This is why we need outlines, This is why I'm always saying how much we need outlines.
It's like, if you would just do a little preparation, that's what I know. Everybody always...
I never necessarily denied the veracity of what you were saying. I just said I needed to sit there and kind of like ingest it.
I'm very patient when it comes to you telling me I'm right, Jacob. We've been at this friendship for a number of years. As you know, I'm patient when it comes to you telling me I'm right.
You just wait.
I'll always, it's okay. I'm very, like I said, I can condescend and say, I'll let him figure it out on his own. It's sort of like Inception, where I don't just put the idea in you. I need to let you feel like you came up with it yourself, and that's okay too.
Yeah, you got to. Yeah, I get it. Yeah. Okay, so one of these episodes has to be Inception and the parable of the sower with the seeds.
Oh, and, haven't we talked enough about Christopher Nolan? No, I'm just kidding. Yeah. We just talked so much about Christopher Nolan, but I mean, there's a reason for that, right? We were talking about Memento.
Yet another Christopher Nolan podcast, please.
Yeah. Are there a lot?
We don't need another one of those. Yeah. No, I don't know. I'm just
I mean, I guess
It's
that'd
an
be a
old
good
joke,
angle
actually.
for us.
It's an
right?
old callback to the very beginning of this
Yeah.
podcast.
It's Christopher Nolan
but
all the way down. That's
all the way down. Christopher Nolan all the way down.
Well,
all right. Well,
are you
there's a lot
satisfied you
talked
got to
about
talk
here.
about Total Recall, or are you going to have another episode where we talk about Colin Farrell one now or something?
You want to know? I am actually, because this episode kind of went places where it's like, man, there's like, have you ever seen the movie Vanilla Sky?
Oh my gosh, yes I have. I can't believe I.
Yeah.
Gosh, look at us.
And it's like, man, there's like, we could probably do another episode about like memory and perception and storytelling and how we engage with things. It doesn't have to be the next episode we do.
I was too young to see it, and so that is not the most memorable part of Vanilla Sky. So that's all I'll kind of leave you with. But yeah,
well,
no, I do remember. I've actually
there's a lot of stories told about perception and memory and things.
I actually
like that,
did sort of just kind of reread the Wikipedia page again, because like I said, I remember it, but not the I was too young to kind of pick up on the really psychological and elements to it. So I was like, oh yeah, what is it about that movie, or why is it, so it's got one of those cool kind of like sci-fi sort of like, is it real, not real perception twists to it that it would probably be worth looking into or exploring.
There's just too much content to mine here, but as of today, as of this conversation, I don't know if I'm satisfied with it. I found myself floundering in the deep theological wells of Eastern mysticism, and now all I can think about is the warning that we're all going to be held to account for the words we say, and like the misleading of others and things like that.
You give yourself too much credit,
I need to go to
Jacob,
confession. Yeah, I hope so. I hope so. God forgive me. Just hey guys, this is meant to imitate just two friends at a bar having drinks, talking about Christian stuff. Hopefully what you get out of these podcasts is that you can find Jesus everywhere. And what you're not getting out of these podcasts is that your Uncle Jacob is a coherent and sensible individual who has got everything figured out.
No, thank you for coming and continuing this conversation, because like as we kind of both recognized after we were done talking about it, the first part is there was just so much more that we wanted to go through. So it was nice that we kind of got to maybe not put so much a bow on this, but say, well, we got through a few more examples, getting to talk about the role that memory has and how important it is to the formation of culture, mythology, and, as Jacob came to find out, theology as well. So thank you. And if you guys want to hear more times where Jacob admits that I'm right, then keep coming back and listening. Leaving a 5-star rating, leaving a positive review. And then you can continue to hear Jacob admit all the times where I'm right.
Thanks for listening to Voyage Podcast. The Voyage Podcast is a production of Voyage Comics and Publishing, which seeks to create exceptional entertainment informed by Catholic values that inspire people to live a heroic life. Voyage Comics seeks to advance truth and beauty found in powerful stories. To learn more, visit voyagecomics.com. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.